Imagine being told that the place you're about to enter has never let anyone out alive. Not because people didn't try, because the walls, the water, and the world around it made sure they never would. For over 2 decades, the United States government looked at this island and said the same thing to every prisoner sent there. You are not getting out. And for over 2 decades, they were right. Until 3 men decided that dying trying was better than living inside. Welcome back to Epic Stories, where we don't just read history, we feel it. If you're new here, welcome to the family. You're starting at exactly the right place. Today, we're stepping into one of the most chilling, most fascinating, and most debated true stories in American history. A story about desperation, brilliance, and the kind of courage that either makes you a legend or gets you swallowed by the sea. Before we dive in, if you're the kind of person who loves stories that make you lean forward and forget you're sitting down, hit that subscribe button right now. We tell history the way it was always meant to be told. Now, let's talk about Alcatraz. Not the tourist attraction, not the movie backdrop, the real Alcatraz, a cold, wind-battered island sitting in the middle of San Francisco Bay, where the water is so brutal and the currents so violent that even strong swimmers didn't stand a chance. The federal government didn't choose this island by accident. They chose it because of the water. Because even if a man somehow got through the walls, through the guards, through the fences, the bay itself would finish the job. For 29 years, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary held some of the most dangerous men in America. Al Capone was there. The Birdman was there. Men who had terrorized entire cities ended up on that rock, stripped of everything, staring at the San Francisco skyline from a place they were never supposed to leave. And in all those years, in all those escape attempts, not a single prisoner was ever confirmed to have made it out alive. Until June 11th, 1962, 3 men, Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin. Their names aren't as famous as the prison they broke out of, but what they pulled off that night is the kind of thing that makes engineers scratch their heads and security experts lose sleep, even today. But to understand what they did, you first need to understand where they were. Alcatraz was not a normal prison. It was a prison designed to hold the prisoners that other prisons couldn't handle. Men who had escaped from other facilities. Men who were considered too dangerous, too clever, or too much of an influence on other inmates. If you ended up on a rock, it meant the system had looked at you and decided that maximum security wasn't enough. You needed an island. The cells were small. The rules were strict. You earned your privileges. You ate in silence. You worked, you returned to your cell, and you did it again next day. The psychological weight of seeing freedom every single morning, the San Francisco skyline glittering across the water, close enough to look real, far enough to feel like a cruel joke, that was part of the punishment too. Most men broke under it. They counted their days. They kept their heads down. They convinced themselves there was no way out, because every piece of evidence told them exactly that. Frank Morris was not most men. Morris had been in and out of the criminal justice system since he was 13 years old. But underneath the record and the reputation was something the system consistently underestimated. An IQ that prison testing clocked at 133, above genius level. Morris didn't just survive Alcatraz. He studied it. Every corridor, every shift change, every crack and corner. He watched the guards the way a chess player watches the board, always 3 moves ahead. And then he found something small, something that everyone else had walked past without a second thought. The utility corridor behind the cells. The prison was old, built in the 1930s. The salt, air, and moisture from the bay had been quietly eating away at the concrete for decades. Behind the cell walls, in a narrow passage that ran along the back of the cell block, the concrete had weakened. Not collapsed, not visibly broken, but weakened just enough that with the right tool and enough patience, a man could make it give. Morris recruited the Anglin brothers. John and Clarence were close. They thought alike, moved alike, and trusted each other the way only people who grew up surviving the same hard life can. They had attempted escapes before at other facilities. Failed but attempted, together with Morris and a 4th man named Alan West who would ultimately not make it out. They began one of the most methodical, quietly brilliant escape operations in American criminal history. They didn't have tools, so they made them. Spoons from the cafeteria, sharpened against the concrete floor over weeks, became makeshift drills. A homemade drill motor was fashioned from a vacuum cleaner fan motor, muffled and hidden, run only when the noise from the prison's weekly accordion concerts covered the sound. Inch by inch, night after night, they dug. And while they dug, they built their cover. Dummy heads, sculpted from a mix of soap, toilet paper, and concrete dust, painted with flesh tones made from real paint carefully collected over time, fitted with real human hair gathered from the prison barbershop floor. At night, when the guards walked the corridor doing their counts, the dummies lay in the beds. In the dark, in a passing flashlight beam, they looked exactly convincing enough. This wasn't desperation. This was engineering. Above the cell block was a utility shaft that led to the roof. It was another barrier, another place the prison assumed would stop anyone. Morris found a way through that too, up through the ventilation system, across the roof, down the outside of the building, and to the water's edge. They built rafts, real ones, made from over 50 rubber raincoats, carefully stitched together using a contact cement improvised from prison materials, inflated with a converted concertina. They built life preservers to match. They studied the tides. They planned their departure point to align with the current that, if their calculations were right, would carry them not into open water, but toward land. If you find this kind of story fascinating, this is exactly what we do here on Epic Stories every single week. Hit that like button, drop a comment below telling us what you think happened to those three men, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. On the night of June 11th, 1962, Morris and the Anglin brothers climbed out. Alan West, who had fallen behind in his preparations, couldn't get through his vent in time. He was left behind. The three men made it to the roof, down to the water, and disappeared into the dark and the cold of San Francisco Bay. The next morning, the guards found the dummies. What followed was the largest manhunt in the history of the Federal Bureau of Investigation at that time. The bay was searched. The surrounding coastline was combed. Law enforcement spread across California and beyond. They found pieces of the raft, improvised life preservers, and a waterproof packet containing the Anglin brothers' photographs and addresses, washed up near the northern end of the bay. They never found the men. No bodies. No confirmed sightings. No arrests. Nothing. The FBI officially investigated the case for 17 years before reclassifying it as presumed dead, closing the active investigation in 1979. The U.S. Marshal Service, however, never fully closed the case. Technically, it remains open to this day, and this is where the story cracks wide open. Over the years, letters have surfaced claiming to be from the Anglin brothers, written from hiding. A 2013 photograph emerged, investigated seriously enough that law enforcement reportedly ran it through facial recognition software, showing two men in Brazil who bore an extraordinary resemblance to John and Clarence Anglin, aged as they would have been decades after the escape. Family members of the brothers have spoken on record about alleged contact after 1962. A woman named Marie Anglin told interviewers she believed her brothers attended their own mother's funeral in secret years after their supposed deaths. The FBI examined all of it. None of it was definitively proven, but none of it was definitively disproven either. Here is what we know. Three intelligent, motivated men spent months preparing a technically sophisticated escape from a prison the United States government considered inescapable. They executed it on a night when the tides and conditions gave them a real, if narrow, window of survival. And despite one of the most intense manhunts in American history, not a single confirmed piece of evidence ever placed their bodies in that water. The ocean keeps its secrets well, but so do men who have spent their whole lives learning how to disappear. Whether Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers drowned in the cold dark of San Francisco Bay, or whether they walked out of the water on the other side and quietly became ghosts, living out the rest of their lives somewhere the law would never find them, nobody knows. Not for certain. And maybe that's the point, because Alcatraz was supposed to be the end of the story, the last chapter, the place where hope ran out and the bay did the rest. But somewhere in the space between that island and the mainland, three men wrote a different ending, one that history still can't quite close. That's the story of the only men who ever challenged Alcatraz and were never proven wrong. If this gave you chills or made you rethink something you thought you already knew, let us know in the comments. What do you think happened? Did they make it? Drop your theory below because I genuinely want to read every single one. If you're new here, subscribe to Epic Stories. We bring you the stories that history books summarize in a paragraph and turn them into something you'll actually remember. And if you enjoyed this one, share it with someone who loves a story that doesn't have a clean ending. We'll see you in the next one.